Yo, Adam Saxon with Guy in a Cube, and in this video we are going to look at the difference between import, DirectQuery, live connections inside of Power BI. Stay tuned. If you're finding us for the first time, be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the videos from both Patrick and myself. All right, why am I even talking about this? I end up having a lot of conversations with customers and just folks using Power BI, and it still comes up in terms of trying to understand the difference between these options of working with your data. So I just wanted to put a video together just to walk through what those items are, some considerations when you're trying to use them, and then also, what are the ramifications of going that direction? What am I gonna hit? What do I need to think about long term? All right, enough of all this talking. Let's head over to my computer to take a look at these items. All right, we are inside Power BI Desktop. So the first thing we're gonna do is go get some data, right? We're gonna go to Get Data. We're gonna come down to SQL Server, and we're gonna get some options here. So the first thing is we're gonna enter in our server name and database name, right? And then we have a choice here. The choice is the data connectivity mode selection. So I can either do import or I can do DirectQuery. And this is where the question comes in, right? What do I choose? Why would I choose one way versus another? And then what's going to happen down the road if I choose one direction and then I find out later I need to go the other way? So to start that journey, let's talk about the import option, right? So the import option, what this means is that we're going to connect to the data source. This could be on-premise, it could be in the cloud. We're going to take a copy of that data and bring it locally inside of Power BI Desktop. So the data is going to reside in the data model inside of the Power BI Desktop file. So we've got that copy of data locally, right? Then once I've shaped the data, I've got it in my data model, everything's great, and I go to publish that to the service, I'm actually taking the data model inside of Power BI Desktop, publishing that to Power BI, and now that data will reside in the Microsoft Data Center. And the way that data gets back up to date is you would then do a scheduled refresh or just an interactive refresh and then reprocess that data. This is very similar to if you're doing analysis services on premises and you have to go and process that model or cube. It's the same type of concept. All right, so one of the benefits here, if we go back to Get Data and we come down to More and we see all these data sources, all of the data sources are available when we go from an import perspective. So there's no real restrictions here, right? I can use every data source in the list, which is great. So that gives me a lot of flexibility. Also, I can mash up that data between any of those data sources. So if I've got something from SQL Server, I've got something coming from Excel, maybe got a SharePoint list or something, I can bring all that together, shape it, pump it out, and now I can build visuals on top of that data. So great, a lot of flexibility. And as you can imagine also, I've got full capabilities of Power BI. So I can do everything in Power Query, can do everything from a data model perspective in DAX, and I have the full visualization components of Power BI as well. So let's talk about some of the challenges on the import side. So if you are not using Power BI Premium, you have a limit of a 1 gig data set on disk. So that's compressed, but that is the data model size restriction when we go to publish to Power BI. If you are using Premium, it could go up to 10 gigs as your limit. So that's up if you're using like a P3. So if your data set's gonna be larger than 10 gigs, what do? You can look at some of the other options I'm gonna talk about. Also, what you could do is take advantage of some of the premium features like aggregation tables and do a mix of like import and DirectQuery, where your aggregation tables are the ones that are actually in the data model in that imported stance. So that limits the amount of data that you're going to use. And if it's still going to be larger than that, then import may not be a good option for you, or at least on the Power BI side. All right, so why would I use import? Well, from an import perspective, everything's local. It's going to be in memory and it's in the Power BI service or it's in the Microsoft Data Center. So it's going to be really, really fast. Typically, what I see is that if you go the import route, this is going to be way faster than what it would be in any other option. Also, the fact that we can take advantage of the full Power BI capabilities, and if your data set's going to be smaller than the limit that we have, there's no reason not to do it. Let's look at DirectQuery. What's the difference with that? The idea of DirectQuery is your data is going to stay in your data source. So when we connect to the data source, what we're going to do is we're going to take the schema and the shape of the model. So the actual semantic model definition is going to be inside of Power BI Desktop. but the data itself will stay in your data source. So when I interact with visuals, it's going to issue queries directly to your data source. And then that data will come back to the Power BI service. And when it's done with it, it gets rid of it, right? The data just stays on your data source itself. There are a few items that will get cached that's called out in the Power BI security white paper. So check that out if you're interested. The biggest issue I see with DirectQuery when people call me up and they say, hey, I'm having some performance issues with my report. First question I usually ask is, are you using DirectQuery? Generally, the answer is yes. And so performance is a big thing that you have to look at. And typically the reason for this is that your data source is not set up in a way to handle DirectQuery. There is a white paper that's listed out on the Power BI documentation. It's titled SQL Server 2016 DirectQuery, very relevant to Power BI. I definitely recommend you read that if you're going to go down the DirectQuery route. This may result in you having to maybe change the actual structure of your data on, whatever's in that DirectQuery source, and or look at ways to optimize certain things, right? Pre-filtering, limit visuals, things of that nature. Another item on the DirectQuery side is you can have a limited amount of data sources. So not all data sources support DirectQuery. Most of them are relational data sources. And I'll have a link down in the description below for the documentation that calls out what those are. Another thing to be aware of is if we don't offer DirectQuery for your data source, if they have something like an ODBC driver, you could potentially write a custom connector to enable DirectQuery functionality. Although again, performance, think about performance. The other thing to consider with DirectQuery is that you're going to have limited Power Query and DAX functionality, so not everything's going to be available for you. Time intelligence on the DAX side is one of the big items. So you don't have time intelligence capabilities over DirectQuery. The reason for this is that the SQL statement or the query that it would have to generate to do that is going to be pretty insane and very slow. So that's something to consider if we're going down the DirectQuery route. So why would I go DirectQuery? We already mentioned it, that if your data set's going to be above those limits on the Power BI service, then DirectQuery may be an option for you. So for those really large data sets that you want to go ahead and use with Power BI, DirectQuery is a viable option for it, assuming that you spent the time to get it ready for Power BI or analysis services. The other thing is frequency of data updates. So if your data is updated fairly quickly and refreshes won't satisfy getting it up to date in time, then this is something that you want to look at. So DirectQuery, again, we issue those queries when we go to do the interactivity, and that will reflect the data in the data source at the time of you doing this. So there are good reasons to use DirectQuery. I just caution you to spend time to make sure you cover the performance aspect and do testing to verify. All right, so that's important DirectQuery. What the heck is a live connection? A lot of people just say this is DirectQuery also. It's not. There's subtle differences, but let's look at what this is. So if I go to get data and we go down to analysis services, one thing we will see with analysis services is instead of the option for import and DirectQuery, we have import and connect live. So a live connection is specific to analysis services only. What's the difference? The difference is, I mentioned with DirectQuery, the semantic model, schema, structure, all of that is inside of Power BI Desktop and then in the Power BI service. But the live connection, it doesn't exist. We just have a connection string because the actual semantic model and structure, all of that is in analysis services. So we just rely on analysis services. That's what Power BI is built on, so it's kind of the gold standard. We know what to expect. Any modeling that you want to do has to happen in analysis services itself, with the exception of report level measures for a tabular model. So inside of Power BI Desktop, if we do a live connection to a tabular model, whether it's on-premise or in Azure Analysis Services, I can still do report level measures from a DAX perspective. And when inside of Power BI Desktop, you will only see the reporting visualization components. You will not see the data tab and you will not see the model view. Again, any modeling has to be done on the analysis services side. The other drawback is I can't combine or mash up any data with other sources. So if I'm doing analysis services, that's it. Anything I would want to do from a mashup or anything like that has to be done in analysis services itself. Can't be done inside of Power BI Desktop. We also get an added benefit with analysis services as well, where the user, the Power BI end user, that will be passed to analysis services if we're using a live connection. So this helps from a row level security perspective. And this is true for both on-premises and Azure Analysis Services. All right, so why would we want to go the live connection route? Well, simply, if we already have a tabular model or multidimensional model that's on premises, or you have a tabular model up in Azure Analysis Services, it's already been done. Just take advantage of it, use it. Just connect Power BI to that and you're good to go. Also, if you want that centralized model that you have from an analysis services perspective, this is a great option to use. Another reason would be if you just have a really large model, I mentioned before those limits on import, then going this route is definitely a viable option because you can have much larger models from an analysis services perspective. Also, if you want to take advantage of full application lifecycle management or ALM capabilities, you can do that from an analysis services standpoint. So for example, if you want to do something like source control with your data model inside of SQL Server data tools, that's an option for you. Whew. All right, I know that's a lot of information. Let me know down in the comments below if you have questions about any of those 3 types of connectivity. Would love to hear it. I will answer it as best as I can. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, smash it if you so desire. If it's your first time here, hit that subscribe button. And as always, from both Patrick and myself, thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you in the next video.